came out today, so I'm super excited to be here talking to you guys. I'm going to try to leave as much time for questions as possible, as I'm sure some of you have questions that you want me to answer, and I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can, and just as long as there's no spoiler questions for anyone who hasn't gotten too far into the series, then I'm more than happy to answer them. But I'm just going to talk really briefly about writing Legend and writing Champion in particular. And I'm going to share with you guys this letter that I sent to my agent. This is like the first pitch letter that I gave to my agent back when I first came up with the idea for Legend. So in general, like, authors tend to fall into two different categories of writing in terms of our habits. We either tend to be super outliners, or we tend to just go and just write with the seat of our pants. We're called pantsers. And I am a pantser. Usually when I start a book, I have an idea, and I'm like, oh, this sounds great. And then I'll just start writing it. And I'm like throwing stuff in as I go, so characters disappear for no reason. You know, random people come in for no reason. You know, plot points go wandering off. So my first drafts are extremely rough and messy. And I'm really glad that none of you ever have to see it, because they're very, very difficult to follow. And this was the case pretty much all the way through. When Legend was the most structured, of course, because that was the first book that I wrote, and when I pitched it to my publisher, it was already done. But when you pitch your first book, you have to pitch, if it's part of a series, you also pitch the second and the third books. So my synopsis for those were incredibly vague. It was like, the dark and stormy night, and bad things happen, and who comes out alive? Who knows? That's what happens in book 3. That was basically what I knew. So getting back to a few years ago when I first came up with the idea for Legend, and back then, the book was actually called Republic. That was my working title for it. And at the time, I had an agent already, Kristen Nelson, of the Nelson Literary Agency, and we were trying to pitch a different book. It was called The Kingdom of Back. It was this historical fiction book, and it wasn't getting anywhere. It was getting rejected, and this is about like 6 months into the rejections as I'm getting them, like month by month. And one day I just came up with the idea for Legend. I was watching Les Miserables, and I thought it would be cool to do a teenage version of criminal versus detective. So I sent this email to Kristen, and I basically wrote, "Hi Kristen, hope you've been well. While we're waiting for news on The Kingdom of Back," which was the historical fiction book, "I wanted to let you know that I have been working on a separate manuscript. I finished it, and it's called Republic. It's one of my 2 works in progress, and it's about 67,000 words long, which is actually very short. The actual book ended up being longer than that. And it's a YA cyberpunk steampunk about a teen criminal versus a teen detective agent in 2130 AD. It's very different from Kingdom of Back, both in style and genre, but still in the YA realm. I guess this is in case Kingdom of Back doesn't sell, here's a different approach novel. Let me know what you think, and if you'd like to see the first 70 to 80 pages. Here's the query below. Genre, young adult." This is before I realized that young adult is not technically a genre, it's like a category. Working title was Day at that moment, because he was what I thought was the main character. June hadn't quite gelled yet. And the plot summary was, during a time when floodwaters have destroyed 30% of Earth's land, the United States has split into 2 warring nations, the Western Republic and the Eastern Colonies. To strengthen their intelligence and might against their enemy, the Republic has come up with a test, capital T, that weeds out its inferior children. Those who pass can go on to colleges and careers. Those who fail are sent away. I didn't know what happened to them either, so all very speculative at this point. And then it goes, Day, a 15-year-old boy, is the most wanted criminal in 4 of the 11 states of the Republic of America. He wasn't very aspirational yet. He was only the most wanted in 4 states. When he failed the test, capital T, on his 10th birthday, he was taken away from his mother and brothers and left for dead. He manages to survive, though, and quickly learns to lie and steal in order to secretly support his family. June, a 15-year-old girl, has a rare perfect score on the test, capital T, and is one of the Republic's most promising students. Inspired by her older brother, June hopes to join the Republic squadrons as a detective agent, trained to hunt down rebels, criminals, and spies from the colonies. When Day kills June's older brother during a raid on a hospital lab, June vows to hunt down this teen criminal once and for all. The two play a dangerous game of cat and mouse until one fateful night when Day unknowingly saves June's life. Unaware of the fact that June is the agent tracking him, Day thinks she's a girl from the slums and nurses her back to health. At the same time, he finds himself falling for the brilliant, analytical June. When June finally realizes who he is, Day is forced to see the world from the Republic's point of view. Can each of them put aside some of their prejudices to comprehend the opposite side, and how far will each go to save or destroy the other? So that was my original pitch to Kristen. And then I said, I guess this manuscript goes a little bit back into my original science fiction fantasy passion. But if this is too deviant, I completely understand. And if Kingdom of Back somehow sells, I will be more than happy to start working instead on my historical fantasy idea involving Michelangelo, which apparently was my other work in progress, which I actually don't remember anymore. And then I wrote the book, I sent it to her, and she liked it, and we started thinking about different titles that were not Republic or Day, because Day was super vague, and Republic sounded like a history book. And Kristen was like, can you send me, a list of titles that you think would work for this? And I was like, sure, it should be easy to come up with titles. And I gave her titles like Spark, Daybreak, Renegade, The Anarchist, Days of Darkness, The Republic of Dark Days, Daylight, which is like Twilight, Outlaw, Revolution, Eagle, Divide, Enemies, Rivals, terrible, terrible names. And then my agent wrote back, and my agent is very, if she doesn't like something, she will let me know. And she was basically like, these titles stink. That was her exact wording. She was like, these titles stink. I'm going to come up with your title. How about Legend? And I was like, that sounds great. Let's go with Legend. And so we ended up going with that. So that was the original story for how Legend was pitched. And when I gave my original synopses for books 2 and 3, Prodigy was like half correct. I went back and read over it, and it's like half of it made it in. And I read over my synopsis for Champion, and it's like totally off. The original synopsis was that Day has vanished without a trace, and he's been kidnapped, who knows where, and June was supposed to rescue him. That was the original idea, which I had no idea where that was going to go. And the end of it was basically like, can she save him? Stay tuned. And that was it. And I was like, I don't understand. Just please buy my book. That was basically my pitch. So when it came time to actually thinking of the plot of Champion, which I needed to know, I was like halfway through Prodigy at this point. I was like, I should probably start thinking about what happens in Champion. And I didn't realize that the ending that I finally went with in Champion was the ending that was supposed to be in there. My original first draft for Champion had a completely different ending. Just completely different ending. And it wasn't really until I was maybe 3/4 of the way through Prodigy that I actually ended up coming up with the story that ultimately became the finished book. So there was a lot of change as I was writing it. And Champion, by far, was the most difficult of the 3 books to write. Legend was the easiest because, nobody knew what I was doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. And it took me like 4 or 5 months or so to do a rough draft, which is very fast for me. I'm usually not that fast. And then Champion took like a year and a half, I think. There was like one scene in Champion halfway through the book that actually took, I started it like a year in advance. And then it took me like a year to perfect it. So this book has been by far the most difficult one for me to write. But, I'm happy that it's out now, and I hope you guys like it. It's always very nerve-wracking, I think, when you end a series, and this is, of course, the first series that I'm ending. So I really have no idea how it's going to go. And I know that I tend to be the hardest on the last book in a series when I'm reading. Like, I was really hard on the last book of Harry Potter, like my favorite series, and I was really hard on the last book of all my favorite series, and then when it came time for me to write it, I was like, oh, now it's my turn to have to end the series, and people were really going to be hard on me. So that's what made it really difficult too, is just trying to figure out how to wrap up all these threads in a way that hopefully is satisfying for all of the readers who have followed it all the way through. So, but you know, it's done now. I cried a lot of tears and ate a lot of chocolate trying to write this book, but hopefully it's something that you guys will enjoy. So, so that's my little champion spiel, and I want to open up the questions now.